What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Mafia Podcast, NBA Edition. My name is Jordan Jaika, aka Dr. Fantasy, and as always, I'm here with my co-host, the Fantasy Caveman. We are starting to wind down our mini-series where we are going through each and every NBA roster, recapping their 2019-2020 season, and then previewing their upcoming off-season. So today we are going to discuss the Boston Celtics. The Celtics were 48 and 24 on the year, third seed in the Eastern Conference under head coach Brad Stevens, who's been one of the better head coaches in the league. They ended up losing to the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. Their points leader on the year was Jayson Tatum at 23.4. Kemba Walker right behind him with 20.4. Jaylen Brown with 20.3, Gordon Hayward 17.5, and then Marcus Smart at 12.9. Rebound leader Enes Kanter actually led the way with 7.4. Jayson Tatum with 7. Gordon Hayward, Daniel Tice, and Jaylen Brown. I'm just going to lump them all together. We're all between 6.4 and 6.7. So they had quite a few guys over 6.4. Assist leader Marcus Smart at 4.9. Kemba Walker at 4.8. Their steals leader, also Marcus Smart at 1.7. Tatum behind him with 1.4. Jaylen Brown with 1.1. And then finally, their blocks leader, Daniel Tice with 1.3. And Robert Williams behind him at 1.2. Caveman, who impressed you from the Celtics team?
All right. First off, we're recapping their season leaders with the plus minus. This was actually very interesting. Okay, so we'll start off by saying, you want to take a guess at who their plus minus leader was?
I do. I think it is Daniel Tice.
It is definitely not Daniel Tice.
Oh my gosh. Marcus Smart?
Nope.
Jayson Tatum.
It was Jayson Tatum.
That's not exciting then. I thought it was going to be
no, it gets better. So Jayson Tatum at plus 7.6. So very solid. Here's the exciting part. Their lowest guy on their team was Carson Edwards. They're a rookie. Yeah. He played a fair amount of games, and he was only minus 1.3. And that was the lowest guy on their team. I remember doing like the Atlanta Hawks one, and literally everybody was at least negative 1.3. So the Celtics' lowest guy is better than a couple of teams' best guy. So that was kind of interesting.
I can't say that surprises me.
Not me neither. Going ahead to guys that impressed me, you got to start with Jayson Tatum. I mean, to me at this point, like he's achieved that superstar status at this point. I mean, not the greatest end to the playoff run for him, but overall, looking at him this season, 23 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 40% from 3, and then actually his averages in the playoffs went up. He went to 26 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists in the playoffs. So you look at, like, I believe he's very young. I believe he's only 22 or 23, somewhere in that range. But he's a superstar at this point. That's just my view. I feel like there might be some people that would disagree with that, but I definitely think he's achieved that superstar status at this point in his career, which is very impressive considering you don't see many 22, 23-year-olds get superstar status at this point already. I mean, another guy, Jaylen Brown is kind of their number 2 guy pretty much in the season. I mean, he another guy that averaged 20 points for them. And when you were listing off the season leaders, like they had 3 guys average 20, and then they had and then if you include Gordon Hayward at 17, they had 4 guys average at least 17 points per game.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of how they were able to be successful this season, kind of playing that team basketball. Although I think the one knock on Tatum is you could say in the playoffs at points he tried to play. He tried to be too much of a hero and play a little bit more ISO ball than you would have liked. But I mean, what do you expect out of a guy that's 22 in the first serious playoff run? I mean, Jaylen Brown, similar playoff numbers as to his regular season. Jaylen Brown's another guy. He's in that 22, 23-year-old range as well. So the Celtics, I mean, behind these two, and you could say with the Celtics in their season, almost everybody impressed. You could say at some point up and down their roster, but with Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown there, conceivably for the foreseeable future, for next several years at least, I think they are definitely in good shape.
Yeah, and I don't think there's much more you can say about Jayson Tatum. I mean, I think he's going to be one of the top 5 players in the league for years to come. I mean, he just turned 22 years old in March, so he'll turn 23 during next season. So there's not much to say. I mean, he really excels in every piece of the game. I expect him to continue to get better and anchor the Celtics for a really long time. So not much you can say about him. With Jaylen Brown, I definitely agree. He probably would be the number 1 improvement on this roster for me because he really hasn't. I won't say he's definitely not a superstar, but he's kind of tilting on maybe being a star player depending on how next season goes. I wouldn't put him in that category quite yet after one season. I don't tend to overreact to one season, even though he did improve pretty significantly. But his 2 previous seasons, he averaged 14.5 points and 13 points last year. So bumping himself all the way up above 20 points, I think, is a huge accomplishment on the offensive side. So if he takes another step forward, as you mentioned, he's only 23 as well, so very young there. He can continue to improve, and we could see a 2 superstar tandem here in Boston. I don't think it's too early to rule Jaylen Brown out of making that jump. So, given another 2 years, maybe makes the jump next year. So
very good. He's very solid defensively too. He's one of their defensive. I mean, him and Marcus Smart. Kinda, and I'm sure Marcus Smart may have been a guy you want to talk about a bit, but Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart kind of anchored their defensive season. They were very solid.
Yeah, their defense actually they had the 4th highest defensive rating last year, so this is a very strong defensive team, and we've kind of been focusing on the offensive end with Jaylen Brown and Tatum. I mean, we haven't even talked about Kemba, who is still a big piece of this team. But then you have 2 guys that are underrated still. Marcus Smart is starting to get that respect as one of the best defensive guards in the league by, I would say, fans that don't pay that close attention. I think based on this run, people are starting to respect Marcus Smart. But the other guy I was semi-joking with Daniel Tice, but Daniel Tice has one of the highest defensive ratings for a center in the league. So, I mean, he was very effective, even though he really offers very little offensively. He was one of the big pieces defensively for this team, and he really gets no respect right now. They have a team option on him this year, which we'll talk about soon, but I think he's going to command a pretty big deal within the next few years here. And once again, I know he's not one of those guys where you're like, oh, Daniel Tice, he's a star. He's definitely not, but he's one of those underrated pieces that a championship team needs, in my opinion. So I wanted to throw him in there because he doesn't get much love, and defensively he provides a lot.
Yep.
So we'll go over their roster here and start to look forward to their off-season. So as their depth chart currently stands, Kemba Walker is their point guard. Behind him, you have Brad Wanamaker and Marcus Smart. At the 2, you have Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, Romeo Langford, Carson Edwards, so a few younger guys way back on the depth chart. At the 3, you have Gordon Hayward and Grant Williams. At the 4, you have Jayson Tatum and Ojale. I can never say his name properly. I'm terrible at pronouncing foreign names. And then at the center position, Daniel Tice and Robert Williams there. upcoming free agents, Gordon Hayward actually has a player option for $34 million coming up. Enes Kanter also has a player option for $5 million. Daniel Tice has a team option for $5 million. You have Javonte Green with a team option, a guy further down on the depth chart. Really, their only unrestricted free agent is Brad Wanamaker at this point, who I just mentioned as one of their backup guards. And then I do always have to mention the two-way contracts, so Caveman does not get upset. We have Tremont Waters, and we have Taco Fall, the man, the myth, the legend,
yes.
on a
There might
two-way
not be
contract.
there might not be a bigger no-name back-end guy than Taco Fall.
Good old Taco Fall. So Caveman,
He's like what, 7'4"?
isn't he 7'6"? 7'5", sorry.
Oh, so close.
He's pretty tall.
He is pretty tall. I mean, looking at this, obviously, that this may be what they do with Gordon Hayward. It might be the most interesting thing they do this offseason. All the reports are that he's expected to pick that player option up. Why wouldn't you pick that player option up for $34 million? He's not really a guy that's going to command that on the market. So I fully expect him to pick that up. At that point, what they do after, I know there's a lot of rumors circulating that they could be looking to move Gordon Hayward. I guess. I'm not as big a fan of that move. We'll get to. I'll get to another trade I think they should make in a bit here, but other than that, Enes Kanter, he's just there. I watched Enes Kanter is not a bad player. He should be a very solid, at least role player for a team, but I barely saw him on the court with he played 10 minutes a game or something or probably something really low like that. So player option for 4 point. Could he command maybe slightly more than that on the market? Maybe he's probably in that 5 to 8 range on the market. So if he likes it in Boston, he could pick that up. I don't think it really matters either way. I don't know if you mentioned Ojale with the club option for 1.4. I say Ojale. That's how I pronounce that. So he's another. He actually defends Giannis very well, oddly enough. Whenever the Boston and Milwaukee meet, Ojale plays a lot because he matches up against Giannis very well for some reason. I don't know why, but yeah, like you said, they don't really have that. That's the enticing thing about this Celtics team going forward is aside from Hayward, they're pretty set for the next several years at least in terms of their cores. They don't have to worry about Tatum for a couple of years yet. I know Brown. They gave Brown a deal a season ago, so they're pretty set. They're pretty set up for the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's overall pretty unexciting, but they do actually have to sign Jayson Tatum. This is the last year on his deal, this upcoming season. So they haven't signed him officially to an extension yet. That'll come at some point.
Yeah,
but that brings up that's most likely going to be when Gordon Hayward's off the books, and essentially he's going to replace that contract there. So, it's not going to be overly exciting, but I agree with pretty much everything that you said. Daniel Tice will be an easy decision. Enes Kanter, I would personally expect him to opt out because I do think he'll get that $5 million mark, but for a longer term deal. And I could see a team giving him 3 to 4 years at $5 million a season. So if I'm him, I'm opting for the longer term deal if he believes that that's what he's going to command on the open market. Brad Wanamaker was pretty solid off the bench for him, but you can find other solid guards off the bench, so it doesn't necessarily have to be him. I think you still have to replace a depth piece like that, but we'll talk about how they can do that in a minute. So
Yep.
I think overall it's a really unexciting free agent class for them. We'll talk about Gordon Hayward and the other trade scenario. Well, I guess you mentioned Gordon Hayward, so I'll talk about it now.
Okay.
I mean, I personally, it would depend on what's going on with Jayson Tatum. If he's pushing for a max deal right now, I mean, you have to unload Gordon Hayward because that's the only way they can make it work. They're at $140 million if they pick up their options next year. That's including Gordon Hayward and Enes Kanter. So, I mean, I've talked before that you want to try to stay around that $140 million mark. So they're already there before the offseason's even begun. Well, it's begun for them. But so, I mean, they're already there at this point. So it's going to be tough for them to make a lot of free agent moves unless they get rid of Gordon Hayward. So if Jayson Tatum is really pushing for that max deal, I think you're kind of cornered into trading Gordon Hayward. And realistically, nobody trades for draft picks better than the Boston Celtics. So I mean, they'll find a way to get a nice return for Gordon Hayward. I don't think he's going to sign
They
in
need
Boston
more
long
draft
term.
picks.
That's exactly what they need. And you know that, I mean, he's not signing long term in Boston. So, I mean, it makes sense if they get the right offer to move on from him. I would expect, otherwise, they're just going to lose him for nothing. So, I mean, that's always the argument there. Is, of course, Gordon Hayward's a valuable piece, but I don't think losing him makes that team that much worse. So, I would move on from him before you lose him for nothing, personally. But we'll see what happens. That's going to be interesting to monitor for them. So, we'll go over to their off-season needs, which we're starting to dip into anyway. And I'll let you start off because I'm a little interested to hear what you have to say with that other trade scenario you have and other needs that you have for them.
I mean, to start off, we kind of already talked about what to do with Hayward. I think that's kind of their biggest thing. Maybe not from a positional need, but definitely when you're talking financially, that's a huge impact on their financial situation going forward. So they first need to figure that out. But as far as positional needs, and I know you like Daniel Tice, and he's not a bad player, and he's someone I wouldn't mind them keeping around. But he did not look that good against Bam in the playoffs. Let's be real here. That Bam Tice matchup favored Bam. We'll just say that. So my thinking is, and this kind of ties into the trade scenario here that you've been waiting for. And I've been seeing this rumor that they might be looking to move on from Kemba Walker.
Okay.
And the rumor is a trade with Indiana surrounding Kemba Walker and Miles Turner.
Okay.
There probably would need to be more involved. I'm not sure how the salaries would work out. I mean, you're asking me who I'd rather have at this point for the Boston Celtics. I think it's more rather have Miles Turner. I mean, don't get me wrong, Daniel Tice is not bad, and I think he'd be a solid kind of like backup guy, but you kind of need, I think Miles Turner's more of a traditional center. I think that's what Boston needs more than what Daniel Tice is. I mean, not bad defensively, but you look his ratings were good, but his numbers were bad. So a deal surrounding Kemba Walker and Miles Turner is something that I think they should look to explore. What do you think about a deal surrounding Miles Turner and Kemba Walker?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense because Miles Turner is, I believe, 24 as well, so he is a little younger. I mean, the reality is the Celtics have the depth and the draft capital to do whatever in the world they want. So, I think for them, they just need to decide who meshes well together, and if Miles Turner is going to help that team chemistry, then that's probably a move that they should make. But if, I don't know. We've seen Miles Turner kind of have an up and down tenure in Indiana. So I mean, I think Kemba is an important leader for them as well, along with Marcus Smart. I think Marcus Smart offers this team a lot of flexibility, even in this regard. Obviously, you could start Marcus Smart if you move on from Kemba Walker. Same goes for Gordon Hayward when he was injured, or if they moved on from him, you move Jaylen Brown to the 3, you slide Marcus Smart into the 2, and I mean, you're still good. So, I mean, Marcus Smart coming off the bench offers this team a lot of flexibility. So, I mean, it's an interesting trade scenario. I mean, I don't know how they personally feel about Daniel Tice. I mean, the reality is on any roster that you're not going to have a superstar at every single position. So I definitely think they need depth, if anything,
They're
at the
not
5 position.
not everybody can be Golden State.
No, that's just not how it works. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem. I think it's just a matter if they think Miles Turner meshes better with this team than Kemba Walker.
I mean that's and then they wouldn't. I mean, they would probably have to likely attach one of their first to Kemba to get Turner simply because Kemba's a bit on the older side. He's better. I mean, not ancient, but he's
30.
30. So they'd likely have to attach a pick, and then they'll still have more picks. They can they have 3 first rounders, so they can easily go ahead and draft another point guard with one of their other first round picks that they have. They're still reaping the benefits of that Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce and Jason Terry. Jesus Christ. That's just crazy. That's just never gonna cease to amaze me. And then aside from this, I mean, this is kind of regardless of whether they trade Kemba Walker or not. I think they kind of need to find a more suitable backup point guard. Like that's something they could look to attack. I mean, like I said, Wanamaker's a free agent. I don't know what they feel about him or whether they're looking to move on from him. But I think you look at the 2 with was being set with Marcus Smart backing everybody up from the 1 to 3 positions basically. I saw Marcus Smart play a tad bit of 3 as well because he even though he's undersized, he might be undersized. Like he's so tough defensively that he can handle some of the taller guys. And then they have a couple back end guys like Carson Edwards and Romeo Langford, who I hear they kind of like. So they lose a guard or 2. They have the depth to kind of give these younger guys a little bit some more minutes. So I mean that's what I would say the center position, and I think I would address that by trading for Miles Turner, but then also the backup point guard. What do you think about their needs? Think center's a need for him or not?
I mean, either way, one of the things I had down was big man depth overall. So, I mean, whether they replace Daniel Tice in terms of finding a different guy to start at center, or they just find depth, I think they need to do something there. I mean, Robert Williams is another young guy who had some moments in the playoffs as well, and he looked pretty solid. But I definitely don't think it would hurt them to have depth. I actually think their number one need is finding a solid 3 behind Gordon Hayward. So, I mean, Gordon Hayward obviously was injured. And I'm not going to say he's injury prone or anything crazy like that. But behind him, they really don't. I mean, they have Grant Williams, who's another young guy, but they really have no depth behind Gordon Hayward. And if you lose Gordon Hayward, like I said, they have some flexibility with Marcus Smart, but then that makes your bench terrible. I mean, without Marcus Smart.
They do have, I mean, and the other plus, they do have, if they lose Gordon Hayward, I mean, they do have 3 first-round picks. They could either, right. They could package a couple of them together and move up and get a guy like Obi Toppin, for example, or something. Like, I think they have the capital to do that, or they can stick, I think their first pick is like 14th or 16th.
Yep, that's 14.
14, so they can find a solid guy at wing at that spot. So that's they're in a, even though they have some financial decisions to make with Hayward and what to do. I mean, Tatum's contract coming up. They're still in a really good situation moving forward. So
Yep, definitely. So that's the only other need that I would add there is having a solid 3. And I mean, you have to plan for in the future Gordon Hayward not being there as well. So I think that it makes sense as well to
Yeah.
replace that position through the draft with a younger guy. He doesn't necessarily need to step in and start tomorrow, but you can start developing him into a
I don't
bigger
think
piece.
anybody's starting tomorrow.
Yeah, probably not. Well, I mean, maybe in a pickup game. I
Huh?
mean,
Yeah.
you don't know what they're doing right now. Um, all right, let's go to some specific targets then.
Yeah.
You already mentioned they do have 3 first-round picks, 14th, 26th, and 30th. So they do have some draft capital there, but who do you think they need to go out and get with those picks? And do you have anyone that they could potentially sign with their limited cap space
Yeah,
right
they
now?
don't really have a ton of cap space right now. I mean, unless Gordon Hayward declines his option and walks. I mean, then they might have a little bit of space. But then you got Tatum coming up. So, I mean, with 3 firsts and a second, I mean, this is probably doesn't seem like a move Danny Ainge would do to kind of package his picks and move up. If anything, he's going to turn one of those, like the 14th into a late first and another second or something like that. Seems like more of like a Danny Ainge type move, but I think it might be they have the draft capital to trade up. You imagine if the Celtics trade up early in the draft and got like Wiseman.
That would be ridiculous.
I mean, it sounds, but they have the draft capital to do it. You know,
Yeah, and they have the players because I mean, realistically, to move from 14 that higher, I mean, even if they gave all 3 of those first round picks, honestly, I don't know if that would be enough. I mean, it depends on how the team at the top views those picks, but I mean, they have players. I mean, if they really wanted to get rid of Gordon Hayward, they would have an opportunity to move up too.
they get that couple that whatever that guy's name is
Oh, Denny.
The Denny guy. I mean he would if you're talking about wing players that replace me. Akuro, another name that they could target if they're looking. I do think if they keep all their picks, I think they should probably look at, especially with the Gordon Hayward future, even if he's there next season, he's not going to be there beyond next season. So using that 14th pick to kind of replace the where they're picking in the draft, there's going to be a lot of guys wings lumped together.
Yep.
There's a lot of uncertainty, as we mentioned every single time we talked about the draft. But let's say if with one of their later picks, there's a Isaiah Stewart is a guy that I've been hearing some buzz about lately. He's a very solid rebounder, defender from the center position. They think he can develop a solid 3-point shot. So he could be a guy when they're picking with one of their later picks in the first round, he could be a guy. But other than that, I mean, I've been hearing a lot of potential about an Aaron Baines reunion in Boston. I think he would probably have to take less money to come back. Danny Ainge would have to use some persuasive powers. Might do some persuasive powers to convince Aaron Baines. But if they can get Aaron Baines to come back, he's a good name. Like another guy, Paul Millsap, another guy who I think they could, based on their cap situation, they could probably afford to offer some of the mid-level exception or whatever. And then we already know the free agent class is littered with veteran backup point guards. So I think they could go out and target one of those, a guy like DJ Augustine. Even if they keep Kemba Walker around, ideally you don't want Marcus Smart running that second unit. I don't think he can, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think that's where he's best suited to be. So a guy like DJ Augustine as well, I could see them targeting.
Yeah, and I mean, I think realistically their offseason is in the draft unless some big moves happen with their cap space and they get rid of players and move on. But I can't see them having a significant amount of space to sign a big name. So I think this draft is kind of key for them. I mean, if they're trying to add some offensive firepower to their bench, I think my boy Aaron Nesmith would fit in pretty well, honestly. One of the reasons I think that as well is because he doesn't need the ball in his hands. And I think they have a lot of guys with Kemba and Tatum that like to have control of an offense. So I think you could slot him in and he would fit pretty well working with the starters and coming off the bench. So and a guy with a lot of offensive upside, so he could potentially replace Gordon Hayward in the future in that starting lineup. He would be their 14th pick, not probably. He's been going in that 10 to 16 range in most mocks that I see. So I think
the latest mock actually has him going 10th to the Phoenix. So they might have to, if he's a guy they really like, they might have to trade up a few spots to get him, but
I hope he does go that early. I mean, I've seen him fall to 17 a few times in drafts, so we'll see where he goes, but I think he'd be an interesting fit there. If they're looking for some big man depth, they could look at Precious Achiuwa, who we did a pod on. I think he would be a solid piece coming off the bench. You've mentioned Vernon Carey's another big guy that's going in that range around their 14th pick. A guy that's going towards the end of the first that I've brought up a few times is Jamias Ramsey, who you mentioned, a guy needing to run their second unit, and I think he fits that mold. He's a guy that a lot of people have regarded as a high upside offensive player, so he's more of a developmental prospect, but at this point, they can kind of afford to have prospects like that. If I'm them, I'm going with talent. I mean, you need some big man depth, and you need that another 3 to put on this roster. But realistically, you have 3 first-round picks, so you have a little bit of flexibility. It's not like they have to take a certain position at 14. So if I'm them, I'm approaching it. And there's a lot of flexibility in today's NBA. I mean, we say they need a big man. What that means is really up for debate. I mean, we've seen all different styles of basketball. So if I'm them, I'm just going straight up best player available and the most talented on the board. If RJ Hampton falls to their 26th pick, I'd take him. I mean, and I put him on the bench, develop him a little bit, and when Kemba moves on someday, maybe he can step in and be a big piece for him. So
interesting you say, because I still have the mock draft, but they actually have RJ Hampton going to the Celtics at 30.
30, yeah. I mean, if you felt at 30, that's a no-brainer for me. I also think your boy Josh Green would be a solid piece off the bench for him if he falls to that 26 range.
Josh Green going to Milwaukee, so fingers crossed.
I don't want to ruin that for you, but I mean, if he fell far enough, I think he's a good example. Even Kira Lewis, who we also did a pod, I think he's he could be he's a boomer bust prospect, but they can kind of afford that. So, I mean, if he fell to that 26th pick, I think they need to take best player available. I mean, not to mention they do, how many second round picks do they have? I think only 1 this year.
Yeah.
So
Kira Lewis is probably, considering the latest mock, actually has Kira Lewis going 8th to the Knicks.
8th, wow. That's
so I don't think he's gonna slide that far.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some still where he's going in the 20 range. So that's what I mean. This draft is going to be very interesting because honestly, you have no idea. Some people
are really gonna slide. Like you're gonna see big names that right now that are being mocked in like the top 10. Like you're gonna see them slide to the early to mid 20s probably, and then you're gonna see some guy like, who the hell is that guy getting drafted in the middle of the first round? So that makes it very interesting. I love this draft.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of different directions to go. I mean, I think a name that we've mentioned several times, if they do end up having any cap space, and he could fill that 3 role for them, is Derrick Jones. I mean, we've talked about him quite a bit. It doesn't seem like he's going to command a huge contract on the open market based on a lot of the rumors I've seen. So I think if you see Enes Kanter, for example, not pick up his option, I mean, that frees up $5 million. Daniel Tice, they have the bird rights on him, so that doesn't have a huge impact. So, I mean, they could potentially have like $10 million to play with. I mean, realistically, that increase is going to go to Jayson Tatum once they move on from Gordon Hayward. So it's probably not a lot of flexibility. So
I mean, if they trade, I mean, Kemba Walker has a decent salary this year. They can
34
always look.
million.
If we're talking, if they move on from Kemba Walker, you think theoretically it might be more to clear some cap space, but they would theoretically have some more cap space if they moved on from a guy like Kemba Walker. So
Oh yeah, no, that's for sure. Because I mean, even in your Miles Turner proposal, Miles Turner signed for a few more years at 18 million. So you get Miles Turner and you open up 16 million on the books. So I mean, you would use that to re-sign Jayson Tatum um and I mean, if Gordon
Gordon
Hayward
Hayward
comes off the bench,
gone. I mean,
you could have an extra 50 million or so on the books.
and they can get Giannis.
Gosh, you're right. We are supposed to say that in every episode. Can
Yep.
Giannis go here? But besides that, I mean, I had some other lower end names like Justin Holiday, who we've mentioned a few times at the wing, Wesley Matthews, Josh Jackson, Jeff Green. So, I mean, just a veteran presence for the wing. I knew you were going to talk about some of those big guys because you're not a Daniel Tice believer. So, not that I think he's a superstar, I just think he's a
Yes, that's
nice.
what you were saying. Daniel Tice is a
Daniel
superstar.
Tice is a superstar. I mean, I'm big, and I've mentioned it in other episodes, and I mean, this kind of transitions into where we see them finishing in the future, but I'm really big into continuity and team chemistry, and that's why I think they should try to keep it together as much as
Yeah.
possible right now. I mean, this is a team that has every piece in the world to win the NBA championship. They're one of the top three teams in the East, I would say. Top four, at
Yeah.
least. I mean, I think there's a pretty clear top four in the East right now. So, I mean, this is a top four team in the Eastern Conference. If they can keep gelling together, this is a team that can win championships right now. So, I don't like messing around with that kind of chemistry unless, there's some internal turmoil that we're not aware of. I like keeping together the squad and trying to win a championship together. So, I don't think that they need to make huge moves. If I was them, I'd keep this core together for this year, and then I would use those picks, take the best players available, develop those guys on the bench. So as you lose guys and you move on and trade Kemba Walker, trade Gordon Hayward, you have some young guys waiting in the wings, plus the pieces that you're getting in those trades. So, I mean, if they play their cards right, they can just keep refueling and being dominant for the next who knows how many seasons if they keep replenishing what they have. So I think they're set up well. They're going to be contenders for the NBA championship. They were pretty close this season, and there's no reason they won't be next year and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I'm big on the team chemistry too. As they get to me, I mean, if I was them, I would just. I say they should go out and get a center, and while I did say that they should try to look to trade Kemba Walker for Miles Turner. If they didn't, it probably wouldn't bother me that much at all because you bring the same roster back with Kemba still there and Hayward. I think assuming Hayward picks up their option, I think it'd be better for them for their title chances next year to just keep him. I mean, I know that means they would probably end up losing him for nothing, but to me, that's worth. I mean, they have legit chance. Like they're going to be in the mix for the NBA finals next year. I mean, they have the draft picks and they have enough guys to develop. I mean, maybe Taco Fall can be their legit center next season. We don't know.
Oh gosh, come on.
Taco Fall is going to start a game for them next year. Watch, he's going to start at some point.
He won't even be on the roster.
But they have a lot of guys, like younger guys, like Robert Williams. They have Grant Williams, Romeo Langford, Carson Edwards. Like they got a lot of guys that got a little bit of time this year, but not. But these guys, they continue to develop. Guys like Carson Edwards and Romeo Langford, I could see be a very big part of their future going forward. If they lose Gordon Hayward, some of those guys are gonna have to pick some of that up. But assuming they keep this same roster intact, like they're gonna be a top 4 seed in the East, and they can. There's like in the East, there's like 3 or 4 teams that you could say could be the number 1 seed. Wouldn't put it out of realm of possibility for them to be the number 1 seed next year, and they're going to be one of those teams that's gonna compete for a championship. Probably not just next year, but with Jayson Tatum is that special. Like he can, and Jaylen Brown's going to be around. They locked him up too, so. With them two leading the charge, like they're gonna be not just next year, but for the next several years, because we know Jayson Tatum ain't going anywhere. There ain't no chance. He ain't going anywhere. So they're gonna be title contenders for a while now. So that's just what it is.
Yep, I think that's a good note to end on. So anything else you want to add to the Celtics?
Nope.
All right.
You did not bash the Houston Rockets this episode, so
I did not. There's now you were bringing it up, so maybe I should. But no, I won't. But we appreciate everybody for watching this episode. This was one of our longer ones, so we appreciate you guys tuning in. Have a few more to do. We'll have the Clippers coming up next. Then we have to wrap up with the Raptors, Bucks, Heat, and Lakers, I believe, are the final few that we have to record here. So make sure you tune in for that. Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you're listening to podcasts so you get a notification when those posts. Make sure you go like the Fantasy Mafia on Facebook. And you can join our group on Facebook. Join the conversation. Fantasy Hotspot is the group's name. We appreciate everybody who was listening, and we will see you next time.
Yep.